Okay, so you think you know Ulysses S. Grant, right? Civil War general, 18th president, standard stuff. But what if I told you his birth name wasn't even Ulysses, and that he once sold firewood on the streets of St. Louis, completely broke? Today we're doing a deep dive into this real American paradox. We've gone through a pretty comprehensive source, a detailed account of his life, and our mission really is to pull out the surprising facts, the crucial insights, and those, aha moments that will leave you feeling genuinely well-informed quickly and thoroughly.
It is truly remarkable, isn't it? Grant's life was just this incredible roller coaster, profound highs, devastating lows. It's a genuine American epic, but it often gets boiled down to just the generalship or the presidency scandals. His journey, obscurity to military genius, then a really complex presidency, a tough post-presidency. It shows how the traits that make a great general, like that iron will, well, they can be a very different thing in politics, maybe even a double-edged sword.
That's a great point. And it brings us right back to his, well, surprising origins. He wasn't born Ulysses S. Grant at all. His name was Hiram Ulysses Grant, born April 27, 1822. The U.S. Grant name, that came from a clerical error. Can you believe it?
Sure.
When he was nominated to West Point, the representative Thomas L. Hamer just mistakenly wrote U.S. Grant. And, well, he kind of just adopted it later. And those initials, U.S., that's where the nickname Sam came from, right? Like Uncle Sam.
Exactly. And it wasn't just the name that was sort of accidental. His whole attitude towards the military initially, indifference might be putting it mildly. He actually planned to resign after his mandatory 4-year term. He even said later that the day he left West Point was one of the happiest days of his life, which is incredible thinking about what came next. But despite that, he wasn't just slacking off. He got this reputation as the most proficient horseman, a skill that obviously became vital later. And he had this unexpected artistic side, too. Studied under a romantic artist, Robert Walter Weir. Preferred reading library books over textbooks, didn't like mandatory church. You see this kind of nonconformist streak even then.
Yeah, which really makes you wonder, doesn't it? How did this guy, this reluctant cadet who wanted out, become one of America's, maybe the greatest general?
Yeah. Well, part of it was necessity and maybe hidden aptitude. His time as a regimental quartermaster during the Mexican-American War, that was key. It wasn't a role he particularly wanted, but the experience was invaluable. Logistics, supply lines, provisioning large armies on the move. These were lessons he applied, dramatically during the Civil War. And what's really striking morally is that he viewed the Mexican-American War as unjust. He actually saw the Civil War later as a kind of divine punishment for that earlier aggression against Mexico. Shows a real depth of conviction, even early on, that evolved over time.
Then he resigns in 1854, reportedly due to drinking issues and his civilian life. Wow, it was just a profound struggle. History shows him failing at pretty much everything he tried. Farming, business, like you said, selling firewood on street corners in St. Louis, just completely broke. And the Panic of 1857 hit him hard. This was a major economic depression. There's this story about him having to pawn his gold watch just to buy Christmas presents for his family. I mean, imagine that. A future president, a war hero, pawning his watch. It really puts his later success into stark perspective.
Absolutely. And right in the middle of that personal hardship in 1859, he does something remarkable. He frees the only enslaved person he owned, a man named William Jones. Despite being nearly penniless himself, this wasn't just, a kind gesture. It points to an underlying moral compass. It cost him financially at a time he could least afford it. And it really foreshadows his commitment later as president to civil rights, often against significant political opposition.
So, okay, there he is. Struggling civilian, almost 40 years old. And then the Civil War breaks out in 1861. Suddenly, he's back in uniform. And everything just changes. His rise was incredibly fast. Colonel, then Brigadier General, then Major General. And he quickly gets that nickname, Unconditional Surrender Grant, at Fort Donelson in 62, demanding unconditional and immediate surrender. He captured over 12,000 Confederates. That was the Union's first really big victory.
And a crucial thing to understand about Grant as a general is his pragmatism, his willingness to learn, even from terrible mistakes. Look at Shiloh. Horrific battle. The costliest in American history up to that point. Massive casualties. He got slammed with criticism, including those accusations of drunkenness, which people there denied. But Lincoln's defense, right?
Yeah.
I can't spare this man. He fights. That says it all. And it was after Shiloh that Grant himself wrote, "Then indeed I gave up all idea of saving the Union except by complete conquest." He adapted. He learned. He understood logistics, foraging, the need for total victory. He was relentlessly focused.
And that strategic brilliance, yeah, you really see it in the Vicksburg campaign, gaining control of the Mississippi, splitting the Confederacy, huge. But his command wasn't perfect. There was that infamous General Order Number 11, December 62, expelling Jews as a class from his military district. Lincoln shut that down fast, and Grant deeply regretted it later, called it one of his biggest regrets. It's a sobering reminder of the prejudices even leaders held then.
It certainly is, and it shows the incredible pressures he was under, even if it was a deeply regrettable action he did reverse and try to atone for. But his strategic mind remained sharp. The victory at Chattanooga was another major turning point. That led Lincoln to promote him again, Lieutenant General, then General of the Army in 1864. That rank had previously only been held by George Washington. Think about that. He was now in command of all Union armies.
Wow, that's just immense responsibility. And then came the Overland Campaign. Incredibly brutal fighting. It ground down Lee's army, yes, but the cost. Places like Cold Harbor, a devastating assault. And it's really striking that Grant himself expressed deep regret over Cold Harbor. Thousands of Union soldiers lost in a frontal assault, about 12,000 to 14,000 casualties. It shows he wasn't just this unfeeling butcher some critics painted him as. He felt the losses. The war finally ground towards its end with the siege of Petersburg and then Lee's surrender at Appomattox in April 1865.
And Appomattox itself is so telling about Grant. His terms were generous. He let the Confederate soldiers keep their horses, essential for farming, and his words, "The war is over, the rebels are our countrymen again." That set a crucial tone. It was about reunification, not just victory, looking towards the future of the Union, a real act of statesmanship.
Truly a pivotal figure, shaped the nation's destiny right there. But his story keeps going, and there's that chilling near miss too. He and Julia, his wife, were invited to Ford's Theater with the Lincolns that night. They declined, possibly saved his life. He was devastated by Lincoln's assassination, later calling him the greatest man I've ever known. Okay, so from war hero to President of the United States. This next chapter, packed with ambition, a real focus on civil rights, but also serious challenges, stuff that really forged the post-Civil War nation. He got the Republican nomination unanimously in 1868, ran on Let Us Have Peace, and won the popular vote, crucially, with about 500,000 African-American votes. That support was vital, and as president, wow, he was a champion of Reconstruction, really unwavering. He pushed hard for the 15th Amendment, guaranteeing voting rights regardless of race. He created the Department of Justice, used enforcement acts, even federal troops to take on the Ku Klux Klan. During his presidency, for the first time ever, Black American men served in the U.S. Congress, all representing southern states.
That's a crucial point. Grant was arguably one of the most effective civil rights executives in American history, especially considering the context. He used federal power forcefully to protect African Americans, working closely with radical Republicans in Congress, even when Northern enthusiasm for Reconstruction started to fade. He also did other significant things. Signed the bill creating Yellowstone, the first national park, created the first Civil Service Commission, a real push for reform. And making amends for that General Order Number 11, he appointed over 50 Jewish people to federal posts, including the first Jewish territorial governor. But yeah, like you said, it was a complex time, huge challenges. And his administration definitely had its share of internal struggles and, well, controversies.
Right, like his peace policy towards Native Americans. On paper, it aimed for assimilation, peace. He appointed Ely S. Parker, a Seneca man, as the first Native American Commissioner of Indian Affairs, a landmark appointment. But the policy itself got undermined. Corruption, infighting between religious denominations who were supposed to help manage reservations, and ultimately, it didn't stop the violence. You still had the Marias Massacre, the Great Sioux War, Little Bighorn, happened under his watch, and he even supported killing off the bison herds to force Plains Indians onto reservations. It's just, a deeply contradictory legacy there.
It really highlights the immense difficulty and maybe the conflicting goals of federal policy at the time. How much can one president control on the ground? Financially, it was also a mixed bag. He signed the Public Credit Act of 1869, which was important for stabilizing the economy, pledged to pay war bonds in gold. He acted decisively during the Black Friday gold scandal in '69, breaking up that attempt by Jay Gould and Jim Fisk to corner the market, just ordered the Treasury to sell gold. But then the panic of 1873 hit, a major global depression, and his administration's response, ultimately seen as ineffective. That economic hardship contributed to the Democrats winning back the House in 1874, which hampered his later agenda.
And then there's the issue that often dominates discussions of his presidency: the scandals, the corruption. Now, sources generally agree Grant himself was personally honest, no evidence he profited, but his loyalty to friends, maybe a certain naivete or gullibility when it came to their dealings, that caused huge problems. You have major scandals like the whiskey ring tax evasion involving distillers and officials reaching right into the White House with his personal secretary, Orville Babcock. Grant defended Babcock initially, which looked bad, though he did eventually dismiss him, and his Secretary of War, William Belknap, resigned just before impeachment for taking kickbacks. Grant even acknowledged these issues in his final annual message. Says something like, "Failures have been errors of judgment, not of intent." A rather poignant admission.
It's a classic problem, isn't it? Loyalty versus accountability. In foreign policy, though, he had some clear successes, often overlooked. The Treaty of Washington in 1871 was a big one. It settled the Alabama claims with Great Britain. Peacefully, these were disputes over damage done by British-built Confederate warships. Huge diplomatic win. But he also had failures. His push to annex Santo Domingo, the Dominican Republic, was blocked by Senator Charles Sumner. A major defeat for him. And an attempt to open trade with Korea in 1871, the Korean expedition, that didn't work out either. He did, however, secure a free trade treaty with Hawaii in 1875. That had long-term implications, pulling Hawaii closer into the U.S. orbit. So a mixed record abroad, too.
So looking back at his 8 years,
Yeah.
a presidency that undeniably advanced civil rights, set some important precedents like national parks and civil service reform, but at the same time, shadowed by economic depression and this pervasive sense of corruption around his appointees, a really challenging era to lead through. He leaves office in 1877, supposedly saying he was never so happy. But retirement wasn't exactly quiet for Grant. His post-presidency was this wild mix of global fame and then just crushing personal tragedy. It gets really interesting again here. First, this unprecedented world tour. 2.5 years. First president to circumnavigate the globe. He wasn't just a tourist. He acted like an unofficial diplomat. Met Queen Victoria, Tsar Alexander II, Emperor Meiji of Japan. Really boosted America's image abroad.
It really cemented his status as a global figure, but then you have to ask, how does a man who commanded armies, led a nation, met world leaders, end up completely broke? It comes back to that trust, that loyalty. Great in war, maybe not so great in business. After the tour, he even tried for a third term in 1880, non-consecutive. The stalwarts, a Republican faction, backed him, challenging the two-term tradition. He didn't get the nomination, but the real disaster was financial. He got involved in a brokerage firm, Grant and Ward, run by a young con man named Ferdinand Ward. It was basically a Ponzi scheme. It collapsed spectacularly in 1884, wiping Grant out completely. Utterly impoverished, he had to start selling his Civil War swords and mementos just to get by. William Henry Vanderbilt, the tycoon, offered him a personal loan, but Grant, out of personal honor, refused to just let the debt be forgiven later.
That's just incredible. To lose everything like that after everything he'd achieved, saving the Union, leading the country, then facing poverty. Must have been absolutely devastating.
It must have been. But his response, again, showed that deep sense of honor. And it actually generated a huge wave of public sympathy. People were outraged that this could happen to Grant. And then, facing terminal throat cancer, diagnosed around the same time as the financial collapse and desperate to provide for his family, he starts writing. He begins his personal memoirs, and who steps in to publish them? His friend Mark Twain. Twain gave him an incredibly generous publishing deal, a 70% royalty, far beyond standard rates. Twain wanted to ensure Julia and the family would be secure.
And those memoirs, they became this monumental success, didn't they? Both critically acclaimed and a massive commercial hit. They ended up earning Julia Grant something like $450,000, which back then was an enormous sum, equivalent to over $15 million today. The book itself, covering his life through the Civil War, is still considered a classic of military autobiography. Just clear, direct, powerful writing. Portrays him as this sort of honorable, determined figure. He finished them just days before he died in 1985. And the nation mourned him deeply. He was seen as the most popular American, a symbol of national unity. His funeral in New York City was immense. 1.5 million people attended. And think about this. Both Union and Confederate generals served as his pallbearers.
A powerful symbol of reconciliation. But then, as often happens, his historical reputation took a nosedive. It's a really complicated story. In the late 19th and early 20th centuries, his standing plummeted. A lot of this was driven by the lost cause narrative, the romanticized view of the Confederacy, and the influence of the Dunning School of historians who are often quite critical of Reconstruction and its leaders. They tended to exaggerate the drinking stories, paint him as this sort of crude, unskilled general, and focus heavily on the corruption in his presidency, while downplaying his achievements, especially on civil rights.
It really shows how historical memory can be shaped, even distorted by later agendas, doesn't it? But thankfully, in more recent times, particularly in the 21st century, there's been a significant reassessment. A rehabilitation, you could say. Historians now tend to give him much more credit for his personal integrity, despite the scandals around him, for his commitment to enforcing civil and voting rights for African Americans, seeing that as a major positive legacy, and for his diplomatic successes, too. His ranking among presidents has climbed significantly in recent surveys, like a 2021 C-SPAN survey put him at 20th out of 44. That's a big jump from where he used to be ranked.
It's truly fascinating, isn't it, how our understanding of these major historical figures can shift so dramatically over time. Grant's story is such a powerful reminder that leadership isn't just about the big, flashy victories. It's also about resilience through incredible personal struggles, grappling with really complex moral questions, and leaving a legacy that, frankly, can take generations for us to fully unpack, understand, and assess accurately.
So if you think about Ulysses S. Grant's life, maybe consider this. If even a figure as monumental, as intensely studied as Grant can have his story and legacy reshaped so profoundly over the decades, what other historical narratives, what other figures might we need to look at again with fresh eyes, with a more critical, maybe a more nuanced, multifaceted perspective?